Today, we're on a two-song collision course, two irresistible, big-time #1 hits that ruled radio for years. Now, the first song was inspired by a New Year's Eve outing gone horribly wrong. Standing in the freezing cold outside an iconic nightclub, two legends were humiliated as they were barred from entering. This is while their music was blasting inside. So they got revenge by writing a fiery track that had the F-bomb in the title and the chorus. Now, this was in the 70s, so of course it would never make it on the radio with that. So they had to come up with a different word to replace the F-bomb, find out what it was. The second song took its inspiration from a very unlikely source. It's the most ripped-off bass line ever. In fact, one band swiped a piece of this song, and these guys were accused of being the copycats, even though it originated with them. Get ready, because we got two crazy stories for you coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time, the greatest stories, especially today. You know, if you remember begging your parents for the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier for Christmas or another big toy from the 70s or 80s, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now so you never miss out on our stuff. Check the box, check the bell so you always know when it's coming out. Also, check us out on Patreon. We have even more content there, and it helps us keep it a daily channel. So today, I'm going to ask a favor. I'm going to ask all you rock lovers out there to give the two songs I'm going to cover on the show a chance. You know, going back to the 70s, there was the battle between rock and disco, and many from both sides of the war had their say. But the truth is, there was some really incredible music that came out of the era from all genres. And today's two featured songs are songs that influence everything that would come after, from new wave to rock. And the bass line from one of them mesmerized several legendary rock bands. They have great stories behind them from a band that had two iconic musicians. I'm talking about Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards and their group Chic. The #1 hits, Good Times, with one of the most killer bass lines ever, and LEF Freak. Seriously, stay with me. These are some great stories. One of the rock era's masters of rhythm, Chic was built around the genius of guitarist Rodgers and bassist Edwards. During the 60s, Rodgers played in the rock group New World Rising, and then he joined the Apollo Theater house band. Edwards would play with several struggling musicians before meeting his future Chic partner. Each joined the Big Apple Band in 1971. Chic would later evolve out of a collection of demos that Edwards and Rodgers had put together. Said Nile Rodgers, "Right from the start, we had a concept for Chic. We knew we had to have something that was international and interchangeable with the markets, while at the same time we had to be in with a music that was on the rise. And when disco began to dominate the scene, it was, according to Nile, like a gift from heaven. Disco gave them an opportunity to really plug into the mainstream and get their music out there. After all, they wanted to make records and not play bar mitzvahs for the rest of their lives, which is what they had done in the past." Now, Bernard Edwards, just a master, he later confessed that he actually hated disco at first. But then as they got into it, Bernard realized that if they did it their way, it could be really good. So Rodgers and Edwards sold all their instruments and used the cash to cut a few disco tracks. And they shopped these around New York, but were rejected by pretty much every record company out there. Familiar story. Finally, Atlantic Records gave them the green light and signed Chic to a contract. Now in 1977, Chic scored their first hit, the #6 Dance, 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 Yowza, Yowza, Yowza. It featured vocalist Norma Jean Wright. However, Wright was forced to quit in 1978 due to contract complications, and afterwards singers Alpha Anderson and Lucy Martin became the permanent voices of Chic. But Chic's real breakthrough was their third single, LEF Freak, written by Edwards and Rodgers. The inspiration for this one is quite a story. So it was New Year's Eve 1977. It was snowing in New York. Rodgers and Edwards stepped up to the backstage door of the exclusive Studio 54. And they were, dressed to the nines, ready to go. Dance, Dance, Dance had just sold 1 million copies, and Chic, they were on the rise. Nile and Bernard were there via an invitation from Grace Jones, who was partying inside. Jones's track, I Need a Man, was burning up the nightclub scene, having gone to #1 on the US dance charts. And she wanted to talk to him about producing her next album because they were just so legendary. So it was going to be the night of mixed business and pleasure as they kicked it on the dance floor, apparently. Only problem is that Jones didn't put him on the list. So after they knocked on the club's back door, the bouncer, he wouldn't let him in. The duo told him, do you know who we are? We're Chic. But either he'd never heard of him or he just didn't care, because he slammed the door in their face and told them to F off. Yeah. Undeterred, the guys moved to the front entrance where a massive mob was spilling out into the street. It took them forever to get through the crowd, and then once they reached the front door, they announced that they were personal guests of Grace Jones. Once again, though, they weren't on the list. They were just completely screwed that night. There was no way they were getting into Studio 54. Inside, the club was grooving to their hit Dance, 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 but outside, these two hit makers were left in the cold. Now, in retrospect, Rodgers would say, the first time I went to Studio 54, I was not treated like a star. It made sense that I wasn't treated like a star that first night because no one knew what Chic looked like. And studio was all about who you were and how you looked. Sulking, the two musicians retreated to Rodgers' apartment where they had a pity party for two. These guys were really irritated, so they launched into a fiery jam session. Nile Rodgers picked up his guitar and he started jamming on a riff and singing the words that the stage doorman had said to him earlier. F off. Then Bernard Edwards added F Studio 54, F off. He grabbed his bass and they played this over and over again. And they started laughing. Proved to be both cathartic and creative, and the music began to coalesce. The two started to develop the groove, and they even wrote a bridge. As they did this, Bernard told Nile that they were onto something here. But Nile was like, there's no way we're ever going to get this song on the radio. It's pretty hardcore for top 40. We'll show you the way. So the guys changed the words to, they were singing, freak off. You know, they put the word freak as a substitute for the F-bomb. Now, the problem is it sounded really dumb, really stupid. Then the light bulb flipped on in Nile's head. Hey, man, we should say, freak out. Like when you're out on the dance floor losing it, you know, you're freaking out. And Bernard replied, yeah. You know, plus they have that new dance called the Freak. And that could be the DHM, the deep hidden meaning. After playing and singing for a while, Bernard made it completely their own by replacing F Studio 54 with LEF Freak, say Chic, which means the freak. It is Chic. And with that, there was only one reference to Studio 54 left in the song, and it didn't have an F-bomb in front of it. Just come on down to the 54, find your spot out on the floor. And that's how Studio 54 inspired Chic's hit song. As you can imagine, Nile and Bernard didn't have any more trouble getting into the nightclub after that. And if you can believe it, the backstage doorman, you know, the guy who cussed him out, he tracked Nile down on Facebook 30 years later, and he actually apologized. All that pressure got you down. Now, as we get into the next song, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. So get this, right now Zenni has over 600 pair of glasses for under 20 bucks. You can choose from myriad styles, colors, and shapes, including one similar to the pair that I'm wearing. Just click on our info button right up here to get yours today, and you can see what you look like before you even buy with their mirror feature. Seriously, 600 under 20 bucks is amazing. Check it out today. Now, LEF Freak, that appeared on Chic's 1978 album, Say Chic. Rodgers had no doubt the song was going to be a monster hit. But apparently, their label hated it. How many times have we heard this one? As now I recall, by the time the song ended, after about 7.5 minutes, we'd cleared the conference room. We were just sitting there by ourselves, myself, Bernard Edwards, and our attorney. Everybody else was outside trying to figure out how to tell us how much the song sucked. Now, the good news is that they were able to push it through, and LEF Freak was released as the album's first single. Now, it entered the Hot 100 at number 82 in October of '78. It rose to number 1 6 weeks later. Actually, LEF Freak became the first song to score the number 1 spot on the Hot 100 3 different times. It was interrupted by Neil Diamond and Barbra Streisand's You Don't Bring Me Flowers, and also Too Much Heaven by the Bee Gees. But LEF Freak just kept coming back for more.
Flowers anymore. Nobody else. Too much heaven. The river. Check the ride. Come on along.
Besides the Hot 100, LEF Freak also reached number 1 on the Cashbox chart and the Dance Club chart. Internationally, LEF Freak went to the top 10 really across the board. To number 1 in Canada, Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand. The single actually sold over 13 million units. Actually, after a while, they stopped issuing the single because they wanted people to buy the album. Later in 1987, a remix of LEF Freak reached number 18 in the UK. It was called Jack LEF Freak. This version went to number 15 on the US dance charts as well. Since his days on the dance floor, LEF Freak has gone on to feature in all kinds of pop culture media, Different Strokes, WKRP in Cincinnati, Heavyweights, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Last Days of Disco, Mystery Man, That 70s Show, Cold Case, Shrek 2, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Toy Story 3, Super 8, Gossip Girl, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, to name a few. LEF Freak's also been covered by Duran Duran, Seal, Giorgio Moroder. Fish has a version, so does Prince and Kylie Minogue.
2 words. We'll show you the way. Everybody.
Currently, LEF Freak boasts over 250 million streams on YouTube and Spotify alone. So the next year, in 1979, Chic released Good Times. This song is just as big as LEF Freak, maybe even bigger. Good Times is, of course, built around Bernard Edwards' distinctive and iconic bass line. Now, telling the story of how it came about, Nile Rodgers said, and I quote, "I wrote Good Times the morning that we recorded it. Bernard was a little late to the studio, but I'd already written out the charts for everybody in the band. We were playing when Bernard walked in. He asked the engineers, 'What the hell is that?' The engineer said, 'I don't know, something Nile wrote this morning.'" Now, typically the pair would just jam together, copy each other, and then develop their parts after that. And for years, they had this walking bass line that they've been trying to fit in all sorts of songs, but they could never get it to fit just right. But Nile said, and I quote, "That day, I started screaming, 'walk,' over Tony's drums. Bernard said, 'What?' I was shouting, 'walk.' On that particular day, he walked. Even though my guitar part was strong on the downbeats, Bernard decided to push and go to the bass before I could get to the chord change. I'm not even there yet, so we get this amazing extra funky thing. I just told the engineer, 'Make it red.' We recorded that. That was it. 1 take, maybe 2. And that's how Good Times' killer bass line came about. It's so cool. As for what the song's about, believe it or not, it was inspired by the Great Depression in the 30s. Rodgers would note that during the late 70s, they were going through a recession. So taking a page from history, they wrote Good Times to pay homage to the great bands that flourished during the 1930s.
'Cause happy days are here again.
He would say that every lyric in Good Times is a throwback to Depression-era songs. Likewise, Good Times was also inspired by Kool and the Gang's 1974 funk smash Hollywood Swinging. But Good Times would also become the inspiration for countless songs in the future, for sure. In fact, it's one of the most copied and sampled records ever. I would bet it's the most. For example, at the time of its release, rap was emerging around New York, and Good Times was co-opted, sampled, stolen, however you want to describe it, by the Sugar Hill Gang for their 1979 Top 40 hit Rapper's Delight.
1, 2, 3, 4, come on, girls, get on the floor, come alive, yo.
Nile Rodgers of Chic knew that Good Times was a block party favorite. However, he didn't hear Rapper's Delight until it reached the clubs. And he took exception when he heard it. The guitarist passionately objected to the use of his song as the track for someone else's hit, and he threatened legal action. Now, this was long before there were any legal precedents establishing the rules for sampling. Ultimately, Sugar Hill Records settled with Chic, and they awarded Nile and Bernard full composer credit. Beyond that, Good Times also has a ton of ties to rock and roll. Another song that was heavily influenced by the Chic hit was Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. We talked about it before. Said Bernard about it, well, that Queen record came about because that bass player, John Deacon, spent some time hanging out with us at our studio. But that's okay. What isn't okay is that the press started saying that we'd ripped them off. And can you believe that? Good Times came out more than a year before. That was what he would say, surprised, of course. And the copycats didn't stop there. By 81, Edwards would claim that between 20 to 30 groups had written a song based on Chic's material. The group, they took it as a compliment, but they also felt that they should at least be getting credit. Said Bernard, for some reason, we're not respected as songwriters or producers in the rock areas where we've influenced a lot of people. And you know what? He has an excellent point. Since then, Good Times has continued to inspire hit after hit after hit, from Blondie's Rapture to INXS's New Sensation, The Clash, The Beastie Boys, Grandmaster Flash, Brian Eno, Level 42. So many more have used Good Times as a template for so many hits. Good Times would become Chic's second Hot 100 #1. Like LEF Freak before it, it would be a chart-crossing monster, going to #1 on the Cashbox chart, #3 on the Dance Club chart. Surprisingly, though, it had less of an impact internationally. Reached the top 10 in a few different countries. It went to #2 in Canada and #5 in the UK. But there's no doubt the song has continued to have a massive influence since its release. Now, in terms of pop culture, Good Times has appeared in a lot of stuff. In Living Color, The Last Days of Disco, the 70s. The In-Laws, Everybody Hates Chris, Up in the Air, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Godmothered, Empire, Last Chance U, and They Call Me Magic. It's been covered by a swath of artists: Elton John, Beck, Sugar Ray, Bono and The Edge, Kid Rock, Paul Schaefer, Rick Astley, Wham, so many more. Currently, Good Times boasts almost 300 million streams on Spotify and YouTube, and that's about 20 million more than LEF Freak. LEF Freak and Good Times, man, two #1 hits that truly transcend disco and the 70s. They've influenced every genre from rock to new wave. I gotta say it, Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards are truly legends of the rock era. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Chic and LEF Freak and Good Times. What are your memories of these songs? What do you think about their influence on our culture? Let's have a great discussion below. Just incredible bass line, one of the best ever. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.